You've made the money. Your income is high. The equity is flowing in. Net worth climbing. But in reality, your wealth is a mess. It's a jumble of spreadsheets. It's talking to 5 different people, listening to 10 different podcasts. You don't really know what's happening. That's the reality for many people in tech who are building wealth. But this is exactly the reason that I built Wealth Ops, so that you can have a very systemized way that you can learn how to build your wealth as a business. Let's dig in. Welcome to Managing Tech Millions. I'm your host, Christopher Nelson, and I'm excited to bring this episode to you on the architect and build phase of Wealth Ops, which is part of our foundation series. We've been walking you through some previous episodes of how do you think like the ultra wealthy? What are the 5 key mindsets that they have? How do you actually build a microfamily office, and what is that? And today we're going to talk about the 2 key phases of Wealth Ops, architect and build, and how important they are to help you quickly go from zero to microfamily office. Okay? That's what we're going to break down. Ultimately, for you to understand that I've built this to be something similar to what you already understand. Number 1, you're in business building every day. So I'm going to map a lot of the same things that you see, know, and understand in business to how you're building this microfamily office leveraging Wealth Ops. I've also structured it just like the DevOps framework, where there are phases and then there's cycles. So there's architect and build, 2 phases that you go through. Then you're in the run cycle, right? This infinite loop of iteration where you're continuing to grow and scale your microfamily office. Today, we're going to talk about the architect, how do you actually design really what you want to build and how important that is, and then how do you build. And just like DevOps, this is a framework that needs to be executed in order. And anytime you skip a step, you're inviting pain into your life. But let's get started with number 1, architect. Okay, before we get into the architect phase, let me tell you a quick story that, sort of creates a point here, right? Is that there is a, $10 million illusion that's out there that truly exists in this world. And it was highlighted by a television show that my wife and I watched recently, which is Friends and Neighbors. Friends and Neighbors stars John Hamm playing a character, Andy Cooper, who is a hedge fund manager. So he manages this hedge fund, and arguably he is making, millions of dollars every year when you look at his lifestyle. And in the first episode, he gets fired. And he then, talks to his accountant, his business manager, and asks, how much runway do I have? And he has 6 months. He has 6 months before he starts, dipping into investments, having to start turning cars back over to, dealership and so on and so forth. So the reality, the key thing that I want to tease out here is that when you build wealth, it is easy to be overweight on focusing on your income and not spending any time on what am I doing with my wealth? Am I really building a financial fortress to support me through anything? Or am I just believing a false belief that this income is going to continue forever? Because life happens, health happens, family happens, all this stuff happens. I think, the other thing to consider is that he's obviously treating his income generation as more important than managing his own personal wealth. And that is a concept that I really want to challenge. And I think it's really important when you do think of what you want your wealth to do for you, you have to make it a first tier. This is something that we covered off in the first episode of the Foundation series, right? What's the mindset of the Deca Millionaires? Well, they treat their wealth as a legacy, as a generational business. Like, that's a huge mindset shift. So when we start thinking about the fact that our wealth can be fragile, that we have to focus on it, this is exactly why I created Wealth Ops, so that there's a clear, systematic way to build out an architecture of your microfamily office. And this architecture is based on the frameworks that single family offices used, scaled down so it's the concentrated version of just what you would need. So, and this is where I would challenge any of my tech employees, like, you wouldn't deploy a product without testing, metrics, version control. But this is how people manage most of their money, is that they don't have a product life cycle. They don't have a design for it. They're just going and implementing features with no clarity on what they want. So this is where in the architect phase, we say that you don't want to deploy capital until you are clear on where you want to allocate it and why, right? So you want to ensure that you have that clarity. So in the architect phase, this is the blueprint phase. This is also where many people can skip it and they can go wrong. This is not what you want to do. You want to go and execute it. So this is where I'm in the architect phase. We can execute this in 6 weeks. Architect phase is something that we can build together, and we can implement an investment thesis, a legacy statement, and also making sure you do an assessment of your portfolio, and you start then creating a list of where do you want to start deploying your capital. That is what an architect phase looks like. The questions that you're asking yourself are really, especially around this legacy statement, is you're asking yourself the questions of what is the purpose that you want to give your money? How do you really want it to work for you? It's so important that you think of it that way, because ultimately you're not going to be able to have your money achieve any of its goals if you're not clear on what those are, right? You have to paint the target to be able to go and hit it. So thinking about things of, if you did not have to work for money, what would your purpose be? It's a big, heavy question, but it's also one that once you start trying to answer it and you see what's written back on the page, that iteration will then allow you to do another one and do another one. And exactly just like launching a product and building code, it's really about how do you get started, get off of a blank page, look at something to start with, and then move forward. The investment thesis is then accompanies that, because your legacy statement is really your why. Then you start looking at your asset categories, or what do you want to invest in? Then you say, how am I going to measure it? Because the question that I would ask for you is, would you go to work for a company that didn't have any way of measuring its results? Whether it was, a company that had no net promoter score, right? Didn't know what customers thought about the product. Of course you wouldn't. You wouldn't go, because nothing can be managed if there's not a measurement to go with it. So this is where it's important that you start understanding and tracking, how do you want to measure success in your microfamily office? And then ultimately that's going to then paint this picture of, where do you want to invest? You're going to start highlighting, the jobs that you want your money to do, and then you're going to be able to paint that. Ultimately, this framework of building your wealth, building a business around your wealth, there is so much that you understand and know today that you can map to how you're building this business, especially those who have been in early stage companies and startups that have had multiple roles, seeding across business. When you start mapping it, you can do this. This is why the Wealth Ops framework and how it's structured is intended to map what you know and what you understand to then how do you build this business so that it doesn't take months, right? You're really executing this in weeks. So this is where the intention of Wealth Ops, the architect and build are done in 12 weeks, where you're establishing your architecture and then you're also building out the framework. We're going to talk about build next. But the key thing is you can't skip this process. You can't. And so let me tell you a story. The $3 million portfolio with no purpose. I had a gentleman who approached me for coaching, and he had 5 rental properties, he had a couple angel deals, and he had really robust 401k, some equity compensation. And my first question was, so what goals are you trying to reach with this? And that was the question that he couldn't answer. And then when I dove in and I said, well, I mean, is this portfolio, is it making you happy? Like, is it, satisfying, some sort of educational goals or other things? And sure, he'd commented anecdotally, like, I learned a few things from it, But what I'm realizing is the more I grow and scale it, it's just becoming exhausting. In the point being is that if you have clarity, right? For myself, having been managing my family office for, close to 12 years now, I have clarity on where I want to invest. And I want, 3/4 of my portfolio to be very passive, meaning that I do a lot of the work before I invest. I manage it very diligently, but I'm not having to spend a lot of hours every single week in those investments. I'm not getting a lot of phone calls on those investments, like single family properties. I want 25% of my portfolio to be where it aligns really with passions. And also I believe that I can impact the upside. That's clarity. That's what clarity sounds like. And that's what it feels like. And I'm not saying this to try and say I'm better than anyone. I'm trying to say this so that you can see clear examples of what this looks and feels like. So that is the architecture phase. That comes first, and it has to come first, because when you walk out of that and you have drafted your investment thesis, your legacy statement, you're going to have so much clarity. And, I did an episode with my friend Marco Quevedo earlier this year where he talked about how this investment thesis are the compass in the business plan, they're actually the compass for the business plan of, single family offices worth billions of dollars. And they always, whenever they make an investment, they need to understand, how does it align with that thesis or not? And it's updated. They make modifications to it annually to set the tone for the next year. So architecture phase can't be missed. And it's important that you walk away understanding that as a technology employee, you can implement the architect phase in just a short number of weeks, and you can do it while you're working a full-time job as well, because it's structured to be done just like an executive MBA. I'm going to touch on the build here in a second, but I do want to let everyone know, I mentioned it earlier on, that I do provide master classes. I'm running these monthly so that you can get an opportunity to understand what it looks like to build your legacy statement. You can come into the class, you can get a deeper overview of what Wealth Ops really is. And then in those 2 days, we walk you through generating a first draft of not just your legacy statement, but also your investment thesis. If you want to learn more, please go to wealthops.live right now, and you can see when our next class is scheduled, and you can apply now. Thank you. Okay, after you architect, now you build. Now you have the design, you have the blueprint. Just like if somebody's going to build a house and you don't have a blueprint, good luck. I don't know how that's going to turn out. It's probably going to look like a Salvador Dali painting. Who knows? But I'm excited to talk about the build, because this is the infrastructure that you need to run your portfolio as a business. And it's also talking about the team, right? Because this isn't something that you're doing by yourself. You have a specialized team, and you do it pay per service. We're not at the size and scale where you're hiring people full-time, but it's pay per service. But all of this stuff we're going to be talking about is going to be aligned with you understanding some of the skills that you already use in your day job. How do you bring those over? Let's talk about there is structure to the microfamily office, meaning that there's going to be a holding company, an LLC, an S corp. Usually you let your tax people guide you. If you start as a LLC, that's a very easy, low risk way to start, where you can actually get some level of asset protection, start moving some assets in there. And by structuring it, you start getting different levels of tax efficiency, right? There's strategies where you can take, non-deductible expenses and make them deductible off your taxes, right? And this is, again, all operated with a team. But this is where setting up your structure is done very easily in the Wealth Ops. We have a checklist that says, here is the straight out of the box, and then we also identify, here are some vendors that we know and that we use. Here's other vendors, so that you can think about, getting a business checking account that has interest, getting some really low fee, but have good travel points, credit cards. But going through that list, setting up the LLC, making sure you're working with a registered agent so that it doesn't have your home address on there. There's, again, more security that's baked in there. Making sure your operating statement is reviewed by a lawyer, and it's not just a templated operating statement, but it's an operating statement for a holding company. And then you start moving your assets in there. you start transitioning, whether it's cash into the bank account or whether it's ownership of brokerage accounts and other things, to the LLC, so that everything is owned and run out of that. It starts becoming your business. You set up accounting for it as well. This is when really the rubber meets the road and you start realizing, oh my goodness, I'm running a startup company. And I think like anybody who's been involved in that idea to seed, you realize like there is hey, we're working on something. Now we have to go get the entity. We got to go get the bank accounts. We've got the bank accounts full. Like, this is real. And it's important to understand that one of the factors of creating this entity is to do that, is to make it separate, is to give it, in so that you can see in your head, like, I have got this micro family office that is going to be focused on, it's a mission to grow and protect my family's wealth. That is arguably more important than my day job, because I want this to continue after this. Think about that for a moment. We're formalizing it into a business to give it something. And I think even for us, like we have put on our LLC names, like some historical family names that have significant to us, that again is part of this whole, the legacy. It's part of the legacy. It's part of what we want to leave behind. And so setting up your structure is relatively straightforward. Again, this is part of our 12-week sprint that we have to get people through architect and build. As you go there, there's checklists, and it's really more of to-dos, setting it up, moving it in, getting different questions answered. I think where it gets interesting is the team and the organizational chart. Like, who do you need when, and how do you actually engage them? So let's talk about that for a second, because coming out of the architect phase, there is in this 12-week sprint, there is a performing an assessment. And part of the assessment is operations, is, looking at the performance of who you currently have on your team, and, asking the question, like, what do you think of their performance? The shocking thing, 90% of the people that I've worked with say that their tax person is meh. Okay. Shocking to me. Why is that? Because investing in a great tax person lets you keep more money, lets you put more money in your pocket. That's basically like saying, I'm running a team at work, and my key person, my right-hand person, I'm going to make a below average or average hire. That's really what that's saying. So taking that back a little bit, in the build phase, it is so important that you start understanding, how do you analyze, like, build the requirements, like roles and responsibilities, Doc, of who do you want to hire? Most people do not do that when they're going out to hire. Can you do taxes? Can you just get my taxes done? And they think about it again with a middle class mindset of, I want my taxes prepared, versus the ultra wealthy mindset, which is, the tax code is a book of incentives. If somebody knows how to follow this, I pay no taxes. Hey, can you help me unlock this thing? Can I work with you, on the side? And can I save an extra 30, 50, 100 grand a year? It's the difference in the mindset, but it also results in the difference of hiring. So you need to have requirements. And this is where we have some processes baked out for our different specialists, whether that's estate planning, tax strategy, or asset protection, right? How do you actually, what are your requirements that you need to put in? How does that then create the questions that you need to ask? Where are places that you can go look for them in your area? If you need somebody that's state specific, maybe even city specific, or maybe you can choose nationally, but then how do you go interview them? Get 3 to 4 of them, interview them, go through the questions in there. And we're obviously happy in the Wealthwork Collective. I share my preferred vendors with people as well. So it's easy, right? But, it's important that you do look at this as a team. And just like a team at work, if somebody is coasting on your team and you're working in a hyper growth startup company that's incredibly unforgiving, that you need to meet your deadlines, how are you going to treat that person? Well, you're probably going to put them on a PIP, a performance improvement plan, and you're going to get to the point where you're going to walk them out the door. It's true. So in this scenario as well, you also need to have, you want to have commitments and metrics with who you're working with to understand their timelines. Are they meeting their timelines? Are they customer centric? Are they taking care of you? Are they good partners? Because if they're not, you do not have to work with them. Let me say this again, because I feel like some people just don't understand this. Like, you do not have to work with the same tax person you're working with right now. You don't have to work with the same estate planner. You can go change them. And you need to find somebody who works the way you work. I really enjoy my tax planners because they have tools that allow them to shoot me texts and I can text back and we can communicate that way. I really like that. I don't want to have to be tied to emails or phone calls or always formal meetings. I do a lot of asynchronous work. They have a workflow and a thing where I can then, be working on questions. Hey, I have this idea. I can log that into a tool where then they can then, record that. They can get back to me. They can bring that into our next strategy meeting. Right? These are important things that you understand, because if the more you ask for people to work with you at your cadence, you're a busy executive, you want to build a micro-family office, you're looking for different checkpoints, that's critical. So you need to have an interview process, and then you want to track and measure results. And ultimately, right, again, this is a pay per service. You're looking to not hire full-time, and you want to make sure that if you are working with people that have some type of ongoing subscription services and you're not getting the value, just cancel those things. The other thing that happens towards the end of build is just implementing the core processes, the run state core processes, where you start getting an idea of what you need to do week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter to run your microfamily office. And that is actually going to be what we're going to be talking about in the next episode, is run. Like, how do you actually run your microfamily office, and what does that really look like? Not getting into all of the details of all of the steps, but just, thinking about it as a business owner. Like, part of what I'm trying to make sure that people understand in this episode and the next is that this process was made for you so that you can execute this and build this microfamily office while you have a full-time job. Because I built this and ran this while I had full-time jobs, and it didn't kill me. I'm here to say, and you can do the same thing too. So it's so important that, you think through architect. How do I design it? Build. How do I create the structure? When you're done with that, and then you also have the structure, you have the team, and then you also are clear on, okay, what are the processes I need to execute? When you have those two phases done, you are ready to run. You're ready to start running your business. You actually have the core and you're ready to go. Okay, for many of you, I know that you're just DIY, you're sort of cobbling this thing together. And unfortunately, what I've seen, and I've had hundreds of conversations with hundreds of technology employees about this at this point in time. And what I see is that it's either there's people who are burn, baby, burn. They're just focused on income, trying to build that nest egg, and they're leveraging up their lifestyle. Or you have somebody who is just frozen. Like they're stuck. They don't know who to trust. They don't know what to do next. And so essentially what they're doing is nothing. They're treating their equity compensation like a savings account. They're continuing to just put more and more in it, watch it grow. When in reality, that creates a lot of risk, right? And then the third one is the DIY, or the dabbler, or the hobbyist, right? Where they're in there and they have some investments and they're doing things. The impact of that is the fact that, many of them are building portfolios that then start taking more and more time. And many of them start feeling overweight, or not overweight physically, but overweight in certain asset classes or things they're trying to do. So that then they're losing a lot of time, and then they don't understand, they can't see the benefit of it. This is exactly why Wealth Ops was built, so that you get clear on what you're building up front and how you want your wealth to unlock your lifestyle. Right? Let me say this again, is that when you build a business around your wealth, you are essentially building a business so you put your dollars to work, so that then you don't have to work as hard as you used to. That's what you're doing. But if you don't design it and you don't build it correctly, you should have no expectation it's going to function how you want. You shouldn't. Because if that's not clear, then what you're doing is you're guessing. You're just sort of playing over here. And I'm saying this because I want you to really take seriously the opportunity that is Wealth Ops, of really learning how to architect and build your wealth so that you can scale up without burnout. You can leverage out of the box repeatable processes, and you can get clear on, how you map the skills that you're using today to what you can use. So it sort of demystifies all of this. One of the things that I've heard out of the last 2 courses that we did with the Wealth Ops Way was people were saying, oh my gosh, like I thought it was so complicated, but it's not. And when you remove the fluff, you remove the mystery, and all of a sudden you see how you're just creating a business and you're leveraging a lot of the same skills, all of a sudden, that the true value of what this is gets unlocked. And then guess what? You can get your wealth working for you, and you can get to the lifestyle sooner. I mean, that's the one thing that I will wrap up with is that, I started off just like everybody else. Like I learned this the hard way. I learned this by tripping over my own shoelaces. And ultimately what I discovered was when I was a hobbyist, the more I just sort of hunt and pecked at this thing and just sort of put time in when I could, like I wasn't getting the results I wanted. When I made the decision to treat this as a business and really get laser focused and start creating and walking through these steps of the architect, the build, run, the results came faster than I ever expected. And this is my hope for you, is that you can take these processes, and unlike myself, who I had to work 10 years to get to my financial independence and freedom and replace my paycheck, that you could do it even sooner. That's my hope for you. So that wraps up this episode. What is Wealth Ops, at its highest level? How does it really map to what you do as a business, and how it relates to building and running a microfamily office? And that was Architect and Build. Next episode, I'm going to dive into Run. Remember, this is the foundation series where we're trying to remove all the noise, remove all the fluff, and give you the financial education that you've been looking for ever since you came into wealth, and you're trying to figure out, how does it really work? Well, we are here. I will see you next time. And I just want to say, if you want more information like this, this podcast, Managing Tech Millions, also has a blog where we're producing some long pillar posts on a lot of this information, very deep. And then we also have a newsletter where we continue to give you strategies and tactics on how do you grow, build, and protect your wealth, running it like a business. It's all on managingtechmillions.com. That's all you got to do. Go there, subscribe. You can subscribe to the Substack. You can follow the podcast. We also have a YouTube channel as well, Managing Tech Millions. Go follow us, and I think your life will get better. We'll see you next week.